right, now let's move on to our next speaker, Mr. Phillip Mendes, Principal Opteon Private Limited, Australia. Before Mr. Mendes proceed, let me read his curricular CV, all right? Mr. Mendes specializes in the commercialization and financing of technology transactions, including global licensing, particularly to pharmaceutical and biotech companies, and venture capital investment into startup companies. He has also acted for numerous startup companies, 2 venture capital funds, 13 universities, 12 CRCs, 4 hospitals, and federal and state government departments and agencies. He is a director of a biotechnology company, Opteon Private Limited. He's also a member of the Australian Government's Advisory Council on Intellectual Property, which provides advice to government on policies affecting intellectual property. He has spoken at international conferences at the invitation of the World Intellectual Property Organization, APAC and IP Australia, and at international meetings and professional organizations. Let me welcome Mr. Phillip Mendes.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone. So this is working, I can tell. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I gather there's some interest in the university here in there being a science park or an incubator or a combination of both in proximity to the university. So what I was asked to talk to you about this afternoon is about science parks and incubation centres. And the theme of what I'm talking about is how to make a science park incubation centre more than a real estate development. What I mean by a real estate development is that some science parks around the world are really nothing more than just a piece of land with buildings, with a landlord that collects rent, and nothing more than that. There's nothing particularly unique or special, it's just a real estate development. But of course, it's possible to make it something that creates much more value than just being a real estate development, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 30 minutes or so. So we'll talk about science parks, we'll talk about incubation centres, the community that's fostered in the environment that's created in the science park or an innovation centre. And then we're going to look at some of the programs that I've come across, that I've observed or that I've participated in science parks and incubation centres, and how they add value to the objectives that are sought to be achieved in that community, in that environment, and how therefore they're more than just a real estate development. So we'll talk about science parks first. The science park community. We're talking about a community of companies that are located in proximity to each other. They've all got one thing in common, and that is that they're in the business of commercialising technology. They have something in common, that is the thing that they have in common, and that enables them to help each other. That's a very simple way of putting what they do with each other's proximity, how that's of advantage to them. They leverage off each other's knowledge and skills and their experiences. They sometimes leverage off each other's business. They support each other, follow each other's examples, and share in each other's success. It's been said to me, or put to me in this way, that perhaps one of the most highly valuable places in the science park or the incubation centre is the coffee shop, because it's the place where people go and communicate with each other and share experiences, ask each other questions. Somebody has a problem, whether it's a technical problem or a scientific problem or a business problem, and they come along and they share that problem with people that they know from another company in the same science park, ask for guidance and advice from other people that they know, and the coffee shop facilitates doing that. Rather than having to go all the way to each other's office or organise a meeting, the informality and the ease with which that sort of communication takes place is one of the ways in which that community benefits. As I say, the coffee shop being perhaps one of the most focal points and important parts of the way a science and technology park happens to work. Science parks tend to have companies that are mature, and by that I mean that they're companies that are likely to be already in business. They've got products, they've got services, and they're in the marketplace already. An incubation centre is a place where there are companies that have not reached the same state of development. More likely in an incubation centre, a company is still developing. It is not likely to have entered the marketplace, or if it has, it's only just started entering the marketplace. Most likely it's still doing research and development and still making marketing efforts. And when they reach a certain point in the marketplace, then they leave the incubation centre sometimes the terminology that's employed is that they graduate from the incubation centre to the real world once that environment is no longer suitable for them because of their growth or their size or what they're now capable of doing. So that's a fundamental difference between a science park and an incubation centre. Very often they're located in proximity to a university. When that proximity is there, the university and the science park, or the companies in the science park incubation centre, are able to leverage off each other, able to share experiences and able to benefit from each other. Very often the companies that are in the incubation centre or in the science park in fact were companies that were spun out of the university. Some examples of this I'm going to give you a little bit later on. So the result is that we end up with a broader community made up of a university and a science park together, sharing skills, sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, providing support to one another, following each other's example and leadership and sharing in each other's success because of that proximity that's been created. An incubation centre, on the other hand, is a much smaller place. The word incubation suggests many things, helping a small fledgling company. The most obvious way that an incubation centre does that is simply by providing space, whether it's office space and lab space. But of course, incubation centres do much more than that. There's the other obvious things that they do. They share the facilities of phones, meeting rooms, printing, very functional business sort of things, photocopying, internet, security, audio-visual equipment. By sharing the cost of that, then of course these companies that are fledgling and where financial issues are impacting upon them at a very important time in their evolution, by sharing that they're reducing the cost and therefore helping each other. But they do much more than that. This slide happens to be a cut and paste out of iLab, which is an incubation centre I'll mention more about in a moment. One of the facilities of iLab is a bio-incubator incubating biotechnology companies, and this happens to be just a cut and paste out of their website of the equipment that's available to companies that are incubated in that location. This equipment is all very expensive. It's all expensive equipment that needs to be accessed by these small companies which can't afford that equipment. But by having it in an incubator, making it accessible to these small companies, they're able to do their R&D and their development and move forward. But incubation centres have the opportunity to provide much more value than just simply space, lab space, office space and access to expensive equipment. The incubation centres that add the most amount of value to the companies that are being incubated are those that provide the extras that we're talking about. Now, one of the important things that they provide is networking access. Very often incubation centres have networks of large numbers of people that come from very diverse backgrounds, whether they're people that have available money, whether they're business angels or investors or venture capitalists, or whether they're advisors that might advise about IP protection, patents, lawyers, accountants, business plan advisors, government grant advisors, entrepreneurs. The network of all these people that are accessible to the incubation centre is a network that's available by the incubatee company. So the incubatee company is easily introduced to people that it can obtain assistance from. It's one of the most obvious ways that an incubation centre can provide value. More than that, their own staff very often has expertise, and they might provide a mentoring role or provide guidance and expertise and advice to incubatee companies about very diverse things: protection of IP, management of IP, business development and finding licensees or finding finance or finding investors, developing products, reaching the marketplace, assisting them in these broad business development ways, marketing strategies, and the implementation of that. So they add value in that way as well. The other obvious way that many of them add value is by doing lots of workshops and training and things like that. And this just happens to be some examples of some of the presentations that I'm aware of. Some of these presentations I've given myself at science parks and incubation centres. And you can see the diversity of the sort of things that are being addressed. And incubatee companies come along to these sessions and of course they're free. They don't pay for these. Whether it's about how to secure government grants, successful innovation, not unlike the sort of thing that Sandy just spoke about a moment ago, taxation implications, very technical and very costly to get advice about taxation implications of IP transactions, when to license, how to make a project attractive to a venture capitalist, due diligence issues, writing a business plan, doing business in the United States, or doing business in Europe, or doing business in Japan. All of these places, of course, very diverse in the way you might approach doing business there. Pitching, being ready for an investor. Again, the most obvious ways in which an incubation centre provides value. But I'll go on now and talk about some of the more unique things that incubation centres and science parks might do. iLab is an incubation centre in Australia, in Brisbane, where I'm from. It was established not that long ago, in 2000, by the Queensland Government. There are 22 companies in iLab at the present time. 20 companies have graduated. In other words, in the last 8 years, there are 20 companies that have been there and have moved on by reason of their growth, or by reason of their needs, or by reason of their maturity. They've graduated from the incubation centre and moved on into the real world, as it's sometimes put. One outstanding example, QRX Pharma. This is a company that I formed about 5 years ago, I guess, with technology, a package of technology from the university, about 4 technologies together, and they were incubated in iLab for some 3.5 years, I guess, and they raised $50 million in an initial public offering in May 2007. And of course, they're not there anymore. They took their technology to a state of development that ramped it up enormously, went public, raised a very large amount of money, and they're one of the companies that have graduated out of the centre. 2 locations, one not far from the university where the IT companies are all clustered, and one in the Brisbane Technology Park, which is much further away, where all the biotech companies cluster. Now, one of the things that they do in a very, very good way is a mentoring program that they have. They've gone and formed relationships and networks with a large group of diverse people in Brisbane, whether they're lawyers, patent attorneys, entrepreneurs, people who have been in business in taking new technology to market and been successful, CEOs of companies, either active CEOs who are still working or retired CEOs, research directors, again, who are either active or retired, consultants, the list goes on. It's a very, very diverse. Each incubated company at iLab has 3 mentors allocated to it, having regard to the sort of company that it is and what its needs are. 3 people allocated to it. And of course, these companies make enormous use of this, I'm about to say a service, but of course it's not a service at all, because there's no payment associated with this. The mentors don't get paid. The companies consult with their mentors, they access the expertise of those mentors, they access the experience of those mentors, and the advice is free. The mentors give up their time voluntarily. They don't get paid. And some of them devote enormous amounts of time to the incubated companies. There's meetings that take place regularly, then there's phone calls that happen at any time, as the need arises, phone calls. And the companies, of course, therefore get a lot of benefit from the mentoring and the advice and the guidance and the experiences that the mentors are willing to share. And the mentors do this because they all share a passion. The passion is to make companies succeed, technology companies succeed. The mentors do it without payment because it's an opportunity for them to share their experiences and to contribute to a successful company. And it's rewarding for the companies being incubated because they can access the mentor's expertise without any payment. Another incubator that I'll tell you about is in Sydney, the Australian Technology Park Innovations. It was formed in the late 1990s by 4 universities, the Australian National University, University of New South Wales, University of Sydney and University of Technology Sydney. And it's a mixed park incubator. There's sort of elements there about mature companies and incubated companies. They have 57 companies at the moment. Some of them are mature, some are incubated, as I said. Many of those companies have been spun out of one of those 4 universities, and it's located within a larger precinct of the Australian Technology Park. One of the things that they do and do very well is they provide seed funding. And what they did is they set up a seed capital fund, which they own completely. And the purpose of the fund is to provide early stage seed capital to assist companies that are being incubated to travel that pathway to commercialisation. Whether it's funding for proof of concept work, so scientific work, product development work, or funding for pushing the business forward, business plan preparation, marketing plan, research and preparation. It's always a small amount of money, but often a very small amount of money is the difference between a company that just simply dies and a company that ends up being successful. And the objective, of course, with this small amount of seed money is to make the company attractive to a venture capital investor who'll be able to make a more substantial investment into the company. And there is a prejudice, of course. Priority to access this seed fund is given to companies that are emerging from the 4 shareholder universities of ATPI. In return for that funding, ATPI gets shares, and therefore it has the opportunity to get a return on the investment that it's making. As I said, the amount of funding is very small. It's $50,000 to $100,000, which is not really a lot of money. But almost all the occasions where the money's been provided, as I understand, has been occasions where it's been provided to enable access to other funding programs, not dissimilar to the type of programs that we heard being talked about this morning. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is called COMET, the Commercialising Emerging Technologies Program, funded by the Australian Government. Provides funding, a very small amount of money, $64,000 for 80% of expenditure. The company needs to come up with the other 20. The next $56,000 for up to half the expenditure. Again, the company has to come up with the remainder. And again, it's for very similar sorts of expenditure. Business plans, market research, export strategy, manufacturing prototypes, whatever the case might be. So therefore, it means that companies need to have some of their own resources to be able to qualify for getting some of this money. And Biz Capital, the seed fund that this incubator is set up, provides the opportunity of that money becoming available. So an applicant that doesn't have that remaining 20% or doesn't have that remaining 50% is able to get funding from Biz Capital to make up the 20 and 50% to enable them to be eligible to get the common money of 80% and 50%. That's one way that the incubator adds enormous amount of value to the companies that are being incubated. Another one's the Commercial Ready Plus program. Again, small amounts of funding, $50,000 to $250,000, again for R&D, proof of concept, product development, work up to the stage of commercialisation. To be eligible, money must be matched by the applicant, so it's an equal amount. The amount of the grant must be matched by an equal amount by the person getting the grant. And again, Biz Capital provides seed money to enable that matching to take place. If this matching didn't happen, these companies would not have any money, would not be eligible for the grant, and the technologies would die. So the seed fund, the small seed fund that Biz Capital provides, as I say, is the difference between a company that dies or a company that ends up going into the marketplace. You can imagine the competitiveness of seeking this sort of money, so there's a very robust criteria that applicants for this funding from Biz Capital need to meet. They must have a business plan, or some business plan, and critical is that this business plan has a very clear set of milestones in relation to all the things that they are going to be assessed on the criteria for them to be eligible for the money. The protection of the technology, whether patents have been filed or should be filed, entering the marketplace, proof of concept work, trials if that's appropriate, the production of prototypes if that's appropriate, perhaps even some initial sales if that's appropriate, whatever the case might be. As I say, very robust criteria, very robust pathway needs to be identified, and it's that pathway that is supported by the money that Biz Capital provides. I'll give you just one example. One example is a company called Enos that received this sort of money that I've described. It was spun out of the University of New South Wales. There are 6 scientists who are the shareholders, and the only other shareholder is the seed fund, Biz Capital. Its technology is a device that it invented that measures in real time odour and chemicals. And therefore, it's a device that enables compliance by factories that produce gases and other smells. And some of the applications where they've been successful in penetrating the marketplace is abattoirs and sewage works. But what's unique about this is it removes the ability or the need, however, for example, an abattoir or sewage work, removes the need for them to collect samples, air samples, send that off for a laboratory analysis, wait for the analysis to come through. There's a time delay there. This device measures in real time with an instant result and continuously the things that need to be known for compliance with whatever the regulatory environment is that they're working within in relation to odours and smells out of the works that they have. And this company says very openly and publicly, and has often said, but for the facilities that this incubator has provided and but for the seed funding that Biz Capital provided, it wouldn't be in business. It just simply wouldn't be there. The technology that it had was not the sort of technology a venture capitalist is interested in to invest millions of dollars in, but for the incubator and but for the Biz Capital money, this company wouldn't exist and wouldn't be successful, wouldn't be providing the sort of service that everyone acknowledges is a good thing, and it has more things to happen to it in the future to make it even more successful. As I say, it's just one example. Just to complete the ATPI incubation, there is one other thing that they do that is quite innovative, and again it relates to space. They call it it's a pre-commercialisation facility, and what they identified was the fact that so many projects really have nowhere to start. It's just an inventor on his own, can't work out of their garage, can't work out of their living room. They need somewhere to be working out of. They need to have a professional soft front, they need a professional address, a workstation, access to meeting rooms and all of that. So it really is just a space on the desk. But again, it's part of the function of an incubator to add value in this sort of way. It's a sort of company that at that stage might then graduate to the incubator and then from the incubator graduate to a science park. Anyway, enough about incubators. Let me now tell you about a science park, a very unique science park, the Heriot Watt University Science Park. It's very unique because of a culture that's been cultivated in the last 3 or 4 decades at Heriot Watt, and something that is the envy of many other science parks around the world. Heriot Watt University was located in the city centre of Edinburgh from 1821, so it's a very long established university. In the 1960s it decided to abandon its campus in the city centre of Edinburgh and go out to the outskirts of Edinburgh where it had lots of space. So it started a brand new campus. Only 6 minutes from the airport, 20 minutes from the city, so it's not far from all those facilities. Started with a great big open area, and the planning of the university and the science park took place together in a way that each complemented the other. That location, that proximity between the two, are some very obvious benefits to the university. For example, companies engage staff as consultants, so academic staff have the ability to do private paid outside work. Companies engage the university to do research work, so the university is a client of these companies. Companies staff enrol the students. So these are the more obvious benefits of the intimacy of the relationship. The benefit to students, companies sponsor students in their research projects. And in the other way, the companies located in proximity to the science park are preferred employers for students that have graduated. The companies benefit as well. They have the use of university resources, so the companies are able, much like a company in an incubator might have access to specialist equipment and facilities that may not otherwise be able to afford, companies in the research park have the ability to access similar facilities owned by the university that are made available. The library staff of these companies have the same privileges as university staff in accessing the enormous resource of a library. And then all the other things, the sporting facilities, cultural, social activity, staff club, restaurants, company staff have the same privileges as university staff. Now, why do I mention that? I mention that because of what really is the most interesting thing about this particular university, and that is the mobility of staff between the university and companies in the research park. By mobility, I mean the way that staff move out of the university into those companies and then back again. And sometimes what you find that it's often related to a project. In other words, you have university staff working on a particular project. The project advances from being research into a development phase. The company is established. And the staff leave the university, join the company, as the company continues through the development pathway of this project, perhaps even into the early parts of the company getting into the marketplace. And by that time, staff are sick of it and want to start all over again. So they resign from the company and they go back to the university. So the interesting thing that's been created at Heriot Watt, and as I say, the envy of many other science parks, that this hasn't been duplicated by too many people, is the way that the relationship between the university and the companies has evolved with that level of intimacy and that level of mobility of people moving from one employer to the other and then back again, and doing so continuously. And as I understand, there are some people who have done this more than just a couple of times. I mean, we're talking about a cycle, of course, lasting a number of years. But this isn't a one-off. It's something that happens continuously, and people have done it more than just a few times. That mobility, staff, students, company staff, creates a very synergistic environment and community. People who are very passionate about their projects have the ability to continue that passion through the development phase and into the marketplace entry phase. A lot of empathy between the companies in the university, and of course that in itself is something that is exceptional. It's, there's often a lot of tension in relationships between universities and companies. In this case, companies there, a lot of empathy between each other, and a lot of successful commercialisation as well. I'll mention very briefly a couple of other science parks. The Zernike Group is a science park manager, has 6 parks in Holland, 2 in Australia, 1 in the UK. And it adds value to companies in the science park as well. One way in which it does, Zernike Ventures, it's a venture capital company. So there's the opportunity not just to be a landlord collecting rent from companies that occupy space in the science park, there's an opportunity for the landlord to actually invest as a venture capitalist into these companies. A very hands-on venture capitalist, because amongst the other things that it does, the Zernike Group does all of these activities. And this slide just happens to be a cut and paste out of the Zernike Group website, but these are not the sort of things that normally you would expect the administrator of a science park to be doing. But they assist companies' sales. They assist companies in selling products and services to clients, getting a commission for doing so. They assist sales to business by being distributors of products. Sometimes they create sales organisations. They search for distributors, appoint distributors, train distributors. Marketing. They develop marketing strategies for companies, create advertising campaigns for companies, undertake research and commercial planning, market research, secondary market research. This is much more than what a normal landlord normally does, but the Zernike Group again adds value to the companies in the science park by doing these sorts of things. I'll mention very briefly the Singapore Biopolis as well. 18.5 hectares, 2 million square feet, capacity for 1,500 scientists. Some of the major tenants in the Biopolis, Novartis. Novartis has all of its tropical disease focus in Singapore with the Biopolis. GSK, the Johns Hopkins University, all of these are tenants in the Biopolis. But by way of example, some of the things that they add value to or create opportunities for adding value to. There's links between the Biopolis and Novartis, just by way of example, that do at least 2 things. One is facilitates technology transfer for companies and the facilities in the Biopolis, and the second thing is the training of scientists. There's a lot of mobility of scientists in Singapore going to Switzerland, being trained. So the Biopolis provides a different example again. I'll mention very briefly one other one in Taiwan, just so that you can see that these things that we're talking about happen all over the world. It's not just in one location. The Industrial Technology Investment Corporation in Taiwan, not unlike the Zernike Group in some respects, it combines incubation with the provision of venture capital. Since 1996, 80 companies have been incubated, and there's been almost 2,500 people employed by those companies. $400 million have been invested into those companies. So you can see again, it's not just a real estate development, it's supporting the technology of the companies that are located in the science park. A couple of years ago, the Australian government did a study of science parks in Asia, and they looked at science and technology parks in Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, India, Hong Kong and China. And the link for this is in your slides, so you can find it easily enough. It makes some interesting reading. It's very unfortunate, though, that the report has no quantitative data of any sort. When you go through the report, it really is not much more than impressions that were formed by the people who wrote the report when they interviewed various people in science and technology parks in those countries that I mentioned. It would have been nice if there was some quantitative data for some of the conclusions that they reached, but unfortunately that's absent. But as I say, all based on qualitative results of interaction between those parties. But some of the conclusions that the report identified are worth repeating. Science and technology parks are playing a major role in the development of knowledge-based industries in Asia. Obvious thing, but important to register. The scale of the investment, both public and private, in science and technology parks in Asia is massive. This is how it explained it. Again, this is a cut and paste out of the report. They were the words that were being used in the report. Asia's science and technology parks are playing a significant role in increasing science and technology cooperation between countries and regions. Science and technology parks helping to attract inwards foreign direct investment in Asia. High technology experts from the region are growing. Growing awareness in the region of the need to enforce IP rights. Parks are included in multi-year plans developed by Asian governments and implemented by well-qualified officials. Generous government support in Asia for science and technology parks and for technology development more generally. So these are just the conclusions. As I say, unfortunately no data. It would have been nice to pick one of these conclusions and give you some of the data that supported it, but the report doesn't do that. Nevertheless, it does make very good and interesting reading given the people that the report writers spoke to in their research and the preparation of the report. So to conclude, a Science Park Incubation Centre desirably should be more than just a real estate development. It's a community, or should be a community, where companies that have one thing in common, which is the development or taking technology to market, where they cluster, where they can all go to the coffee shop, share experiences, support each other, give each other advice and guidance, access facilities and resources that otherwise may be unavailable to them, all these things that we've been talking about. Adding value in that way is the real purpose of a science park or an incubation centre. And only some of those examples we've been talking about: the mentoring program at iLab, the Biz Capital program of seed capital in ATPI, Heriot-Watt University and the very unique culture that's been created just outside of Edinburgh, the Zonica Group and how it gets involved in sales and marketing very unexpectedly, some people would say, the Taiwan company matching investment into all of their companies, in the Singapore Biopolis as well. So that's all about science and science parks and incubation centres. You're probably all hanging out for coffee, aren't you? I can tell that's what you prefer. What's our agenda? Should I leave questions to the panel session this afternoon?
We have a panel session after this.
We'll do that, okay.
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mendes. Okay, now I would like to invite Dr. Christy Gomez to present tokens of appreciation to our speakers just now. With that, I'd like to invite Mr. Ikoro Nagano. Mr. Sandy Peng and Mr. Phillip Mendes to receive token of appreciation from us. Next is Q&A sessions, and with that also I would like to invite Puan Fazila Ahmadin to come on stage